The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the briefing room at Camp Forrester as Major Sarah Mitchell poured another cup of coffee. Steam rose from the dark liquid as she carefully placed it at the edge of Captain James Reynolds' stack of papers. He didn't look up. "2 sugars next time," he said, still studying the map spread across the table. Sarah bit her tongue and nodded. "Yes, sir." This wasn't how things were supposed to go. 3 weeks ago, she'd been leading intelligence operations in Afghanistan. Now she was pouring coffee for a Marine captain who hadn't bothered to learn her name. The room buzzed with activity as officers prepared for the morning briefing. Maps of the Syrian border region covered the walls. Intelligence reports were stacked in neat piles. Sarah knew more about those regions than most people in this room, but nobody was asking for her input. "Miss, could you grab those reports from the printer?" Lieutenant Cooper called from across the room, not unkindly but with the casual dismissiveness that had become all too familiar. "Right away," Sarah replied, moving to the printer in the corner. At 42, Sarah Mitchell had spent 20 years in the Army. She'd earned her rank and reputation through 2 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. Her expertise in counterintelligence had saved countless lives. Yet here she was, being treated like an administrative assistant because of paperwork and assumptions. Her transfer to this Joint Task Force base had gotten tangled in bureaucratic red tape. When she'd arrived, her credentials hadn't processed properly in the system. The base commander was away on emergency leave. Rather than make a fuss, she decided to wait for things to sort themselves out while quietly observing the operation. That had been 2 weeks ago. Sarah distributed the printed reports, studying the information as she walked. Something caught her eye, a pattern in the surveillance photos that reminded her of insurgent movements she'd tracked in Kandahar. She paused by Captain Reynolds' chair. "Sir," she said quietly, "I noticed that these surveillance patterns match." "Thanks for the coffee," Reynolds cut her off without looking up. "We're good here." Sarah stepped back, swallowing her frustration. At 5'6", with her graying brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, she didn't fit the image many had of a decorated combat officer. It had been a challenge her entire career. Usually, her rank insignia solved the problem quickly. Without it, she was just another middle-aged woman in a room full of confident young officers. The door opened and Colonel Vance strode in. The room immediately fell silent. "Good morning, people," he said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Let's get started." Sarah moved to the back wall, listening intently as the briefing began. They were discussing Operation Sandstorm, a delicate extraction mission for an intelligence asset trapped near the Syrian border. As the details unfolded, Sarah spotted several flaws in the plan, particularly regarding the extraction route and timing. "Our intelligence suggests minimal hostile activity in this corridor," Captain Reynolds was saying, pointing to a mountain pass. "We'll move the extraction team through here at 200. Sarah knew that assessment was dangerously wrong. She'd run similar operations in that region and understood the local patterns better than the satellite data could show. Colonel Vance nodded. "Questions, concerns?" Sarah stepped forward slightly, then hesitated. This wasn't the time or place to challenge their analysis, not when they still thought she was support staff. She needed to find another approach. After the briefing, officers filed out discussing various aspects of the mission. Captain Reynolds gathered his papers while talking with Lieutenant Cooper. "The coffee lady was trying to give me tactical advice," Reynolds said with a chuckle. "Can you believe that?" Cooper frowned slightly. "Maybe she was just asking about the coffee supplies, Jim." "No, she was definitely commenting on the surveillance photos. These civilians they send us sometimes?" Reynolds shook his head. Sarah pretended not to hear as she collected empty cups. Her hands shook slightly with contained anger, but her face remained neutral, a skill learned through years of high-pressure situations. Later that afternoon, Sarah found a quiet moment to slip into the communications center. Sergeant Diaz looked up from his station with a friendly smile. "Hey there, need something?" "Just checking if my paperwork has processed yet," Sarah said, returning his smile. Unlike some others, Diaz had always been respectful. "Let me look, Mitchell, right?" He typed her name into the system. "Still showing as pending. Sorry about that. Must be frustrating." "It's all right," she said, though it wasn't. "By the way, do you know who I might talk to about some of the intelligence assessments for Operation Sandstorm? I noticed something that might be helpful." Diaz looked surprised. You have experience with that region. Sarah hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. Yes, I spent some time there. You might try Lieutenant Gomez. She's more open-minded than some of the others, Diaz suggested. Sarah thanked him and left, her mind already forming a plan. She would find a way to correct the flawed intelligence before the mission launched. Lives depended on it. That night in her temporary quarters, Sarah stared at the ceiling, thinking about Captain Reynolds and the others who had dismissed her. She wasn't angry at them personally. She'd seen this kind of thing throughout her career. What troubled her was knowing that good soldiers might die because of incorrect information. Tomorrow, she decided, she would try a different approach. She had earned her rank through persistence and intelligence. Those same qualities would serve her now, coffee pot in hand or not. Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 20 years of military service and combat by giving up when things got difficult. One way or another, she would make sure this mission succeeded, even if she had to serve 100 more cups of coffee to do it. The next morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted Camp Forrester in shades of gold and amber. Sarah was already awake, having slept little. She dressed in the same plain olive drab uniform she'd been wearing since her arrival, no insignia, no indicators of her true rank or achievements. In the mess hall, she spotted Lieutenant Maria Gomez having breakfast alone, studying a tablet while she ate. This was the opportunity Sarah had been waiting for. She filled a tray and approached the table. "Mind if I join you, Lieutenant?" she asked. Gomez looked up with tired eyes but offered a friendly smile. "Not at all." Sarah sat down and took a bite of toast before saying, "I understand you're working intelligence for Operation Sandstorm." Gomez's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "That's right. How do you know about that?" "I've been assisting in the briefing room," Sarah explained. "I couldn't help noticing some of the intelligence assessments about the extraction route." "The coffee lady," Gomez said, recognition dawning. "I've seen you there." Sarah nodded, hiding her frustration at the label. "I have some experience in that region. The mountain pass they're planning to use, it's not as safe as the satellite data suggests." Gomez studied her with newfound interest. "What kind of experience?" "I served there, multiple tour." Sarah kept her answer deliberately vague. "The local insurgents don't move predictably. They follow seasonal patterns tied to local customs and terrain features that satellites don't always catch." "That's actually something I've been concerned about too," Gomez admitted, lowering her voice. "But Captain Reynolds is convinced the route is clear." "Because that's what the data shows," Sarah said. "But the data doesn't tell the whole story." Gomez leaned forward. "Who are you really?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a message. The base commander had returned and wanted to see her immediately. Perhaps her paperwork had finally been processed. "I need to go," Sarah said, standing. "But Lieutenant, please look into the Kandahar reports from 2018. The pattern is nearly identical." As Sarah walked across the base to the commander's office, memories flooded back, memories she'd been trying to keep at bay. 6 months ago, she'd led an extraction operation similar to Sandstorm. Everything had gone according to plan until it hadn't. They'd lost 2 good soldiers because of faulty intelligence about enemy positions. The investigation had cleared her of wrongdoing, but Sarah couldn't shake the weight of those deaths. She'd requested a transfer, needing space to process her grief and guilt. Instead, she'd landed here in this strange limbo where her experience was invisible and her voice unheard. Colonel Frank Harrington, the base commander, was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of difficult decisions. "Major Mitchell," he said as she entered, standing to shake her hand. "I've just returned to find a mess of paperwork and a decorated officer serving coffee. My sincere apologies." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said, relief washing over her. "It's been an unusual situation." "That's putting it mildly," Harrington said, gesturing for her to sit. "Your transfer came through while I was handling a family emergency. Someone misread your file and with the system glitch." He shook his head. "Well, it's inexcusable." "I understand how these things happen, sir." Harrington studied her. "Most officers of your rank would have raised hell." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "That wouldn't have helped the operation, sir, and I've learned some valuable things by observing from the sidelines." "Such as?" "Operation Sandstorm, sir. There are flaws in the intelligence assessment. The extraction route they've chosen is significantly more dangerous than they realize. Harrington frowned. Captain Reynolds is highly confident in that route. With respect, sir, his confidence is based on incomplete information. I ran similar operations in that region. The pattern of insurgent movement follows seasonal tribal gatherings that aren't visible in our standard intelligence gathering. The colonel leaned back, considering her words. You were the intelligence lead on the Falcon extraction last year. It wasn't a question. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Yes, sir. That wasn't your fault, Major. My team, my responsibility, she said quietly. Harrington nodded, understanding the burden she carried. So what do you suggest regarding Sandstorm? Let me brief the team with the additional intelligence. There's an alternative route that adds only 20 minutes to the extraction, but reduces the risk substantially. Captain Reynolds has been leading this operation for weeks. He may not welcome last-minute changes. This isn't about ego, sir. It's about bringing our people home safely. Harrington studied her for a long moment. Very well. I'll have your proper uniforms and credentials delivered immediately. Report to the briefing room at 1400 hours. I'll introduce you properly then. Thank you, sir. As Sarah left the commander's office, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Finally, she could do her job properly. But another part of her was anxious about the transition. The team had gotten used to seeing her in one role. How would they react to the truth? She spent the next few hours in her quarters, reviewing all the intelligence on Operation Sandstorm. When a knock came at her door, she found a young corporal holding a garment bag. Your uniforms, ma'am, he said, his eyes widening as he took in the name on the door. Major Mitchell, we didn't know. That's all right, Corporal, she said, taking the bag. Thank you. Sarah changed into her proper uniform, the weight of the oak leaf insignia on her shoulders familiar and grounding. She pinned her service medals, including the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, to her chest. Looking in the mirror, she saw herself again, Major Sarah Mitchell, not the coffee lady. At precisely 1400 hours, Sarah walked into the briefing room where the Sandstorm team was already assembled. Conversations died as heads turned toward her. Captain Reynolds, in the middle of explaining something to Lieutenant Cooper, stopped mid-sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Harrington said, entering behind her. I'd like to introduce Major Sarah Mitchell, who will be joining the Sandstorm operation as our senior intelligence officer. The room fell completely silent as all eyes moved from her uniform to her face, recognition dawning. Lieutenant Gomez's mouth actually fell open. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Major Mitchell, the colonel continued, has extensive experience in the target region and brings valuable insights to our operation. I expect everyone to give her their full cooperation. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Thank you, Colonel. Let's get to work, shall we? We have an extraction route to reconsider. Captain Reynolds set his coffee cup down with deliberate care, his face an unreadable mask. Colonel, with all due respect, we've been planning this operation for weeks. Changing the extraction route now could jeopardize the entire mission. Colonel Harrington's expression hardened slightly. Captain, Major Mitchell isn't suggesting changes on a whim. She has valuable experience that directly applies to this operation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could feel the stares of everyone present, some curious, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. She had anticipated resistance, but standing here now, she felt the full weight of what she was asking them to do. Trust her, a stranger who, until moments ago, had been serving their coffee. Perhaps I could explain my concerns, Sarah said, stepping toward the map table. Her voice was calm and professional, the voice she'd used in countless briefings and high-pressure situations. Reynolds reluctantly stepped aside, his body language stiff as he yielded the floor. Sarah pointed to the mountain pass they had designated as their primary extraction route. The satellite data shows this area as having minimal hostile activity for the past 3 weeks. That's accurate as far as it goes. She looked around the room, making eye contact with key team members. What the data doesn't show is the seasonal pattern that affects insurgent movements in this region. She pulled up additional imagery on the main screen. These are photos from Kandahar province in 2018, where I led similar operations. Note the pattern of movement around local settlements during the harvest festival period, which begins next week. Lieutenant Gomez leaned forward, studying the images. These match what I was seeing in some of our secondary intelligence sources. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The pattern is nearly identical. During this period, insurgent groups move their forces to cover key mountain passes while village celebrations provide cover for their movements. It's a tradition that goes back decades. Sarah brought up a topographical map. The good news is that there's an alternative route through this valley that adds only 20 minutes to the extraction timeline, but avoids these high-risk areas completely. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah walked them through the detailed intelligence, answering questions and addressing concerns. Gradually, the tension in the room began to ease as the team recognized her expertise. All except Captain Reynolds, whose jaw remained tight, arms folded across his chest. When she finished, Colonel Harrington looked around the room. Any other questions? Reynolds finally spoke. How do we know this intelligence is reliable? With respect, Major, your last extraction operation in this region didn't end well. The room went silent. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the faces of the soldiers she'd lost flashing in her mind. She took a slow, steady breath. You're right, Captain. We lost 2 good men on that operation. Her voice was quiet but carried throughout the room. We followed the standard intelligence assessment, much like the one you've prepared. The data showed the route was clear. It wasn't. She met Reynolds' gaze directly. I live with that every day, which is why I'm standing here now, doing everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen again. Something shifted in Reynolds' expression. Not quite acceptance, but a reluctant recognition of her sincerity. Colonel Harrington broke the silence. We'll proceed with Major Mitchell's recommended route adjustments. Captain Reynolds will continue as tactical lead, with Major Mitchell overseeing intelligence. I want updated briefings on my desk by 800 tomorrow. As the meeting dispersed, Lieutenant Gomez approached Sarah. Major, I'd like to review some additional intelligence with you if that's all right. Of course, Sarah nodded, grateful for the young officer's support. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Sarah integrated fully into the operation. Some team members quickly adjusted to her new role, while others remained standoffish. Captain Reynolds maintained a professional but cold demeanor, accepting her input without enthusiasm. That evening, Sarah was studying maps in the now-empty briefing room when Reynolds entered. He stopped when he saw her, clearly not expecting anyone to be there. Captain, she acknowledged. He hesitated, then walked over to her table. Major, he paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. I want to be clear that my concern is for the success of this mission and the safety of our people. As is mine, Sarah replied evenly. Your intelligence is solid, he admitted reluctantly, but changing course this late introduces variables. Every operation has variables, Captain. The key is identifying which ones pose the greatest risk. Reynolds studied her for a moment. You could have identified yourself from the beginning. Why didn't you? Sarah considered her answer carefully. At first, it was a bureaucratic mix-up that I expected to be resolved quickly. Then, as days passed, I found there was value in observing how the operation was developing without the influence of rank. You were testing us, he said, a edge to his voice. No, Sarah shook her head. I was learning about the mission, about the team, about how things are done here. And serving coffee while doing it, Reynolds said, a hint of embarrassment creeping into his tone. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The coffee was incidental, though I've noticed you take it with 2 sugars, not 1. The captain actually flushed slightly. About that, and the other things, I owe you an apology, Major. You treated me the way anyone would treat base support staff, Captain. The problem wasn't your behavior toward me. It was your assumption about who I was based on what you saw. Reynolds nodded slowly, accepting the gentle rebuke. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad to have your expertise on this operation, even if I wish it had come a bit earlier in the planning process. Understood. Now, would you like to review these alternative extraction points with me? I'd value your tactical perspective. For the next hour, they worked together, gradually finding a rhythm as professionals with complementary skills. The awkwardness didn't disappear entirely, but it eased as their shared focus on the mission took precedence. The following days were intense as final preparations for Operation Sandstorm accelerated. Sarah worked closely with the intelligence team, refining their assessment and monitoring for any changes in the situation on the ground. She maintained a professional relationship with Captain Reynolds, their initial friction giving way to a cautious mutual respect. 3 days before the operation was set to launch, Sarah was in the communications center reviewing the latest surveillance data when an alarming report came in. A drone had captured images of significant insurgent movement exactly where she had predicted, directly along the originally planned extraction route. "Get me Colonel Harrington and Captain Reynolds immediately," she ordered. Within minutes, the senior officers were gathered around the surveillance feed. The evidence was undeniable. The original route would have led the extraction team straight into a heavily armed insurgent group. "If we had stuck with the original plan," Lieutenant Cooper's voice trailed off. "Let's focus on the current situation," Sarah said firmly. "The alternative route still appears clear, but we should increase surveillance for the next 48 hours to ensure it stays that way." Captain Reynolds nodded. "I'll adjust the tactical plan accordingly. We may need to add additional air support as a precaution." As the team dispersed to implement the changes, Reynolds paused beside Sarah. "You were right," he said quietly. "We would have been walking into an ambush." Sarah met his gaze. "Now we won't be." The night before the operation, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, thoughts racing through every detail, every contingency. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Gomez. "Major, the final intelligence report is ready for your review." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sarah said, taking the folder. "Couldn't sleep either." "No, ma'am," Gomez admitted. "First major operation." Sarah nodded understandingly. "The waiting is always the hardest part." She paused, then added, "You've done excellent work on this, Lieutenant. Your attention to detail in the intelligence analysis has been invaluable." Gomez smiled, standing a little straighter at the praise. "Thank you, Major. It means a lot coming from you." She hesitated. "Some of us were talking earlier about how things might have gone if you hadn't been here, if you'd just been." "The coffee, lady," Sarah finished for her. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, let's be grateful it didn't come to that," Sarah said. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow will be a long day." As Gomez left, Sarah turned back to the intelligence report. Tomorrow would indeed be a long day, one where everything they had worked for would be put to the test, and where the lessons learned from past mistakes might save lives. Or cost them. Dawn broke over Camp Forrester with a sky streaked in crimson and gold. Operation Sandstorm was underway. In the command center, Sarah stood beside Captain Reynolds as they monitored the extraction team's progress. The atmosphere was tense but focused, each person performing their role with practiced precision. "Sandstorm team approaching Checkpoint Alpha," came the radio call. "No contact, proceeding as planned." Sarah studied the surveillance feeds, searching for any sign of trouble. The alternative route was holding secure so far, but she knew how quickly situations could change in this region. "Major," Lieutenant Gomez called from her station. "Drone feeds showing movement 3 clicks east of the team's position." "Identification?" Sarah asked, moving quickly to Gomez's screen. "Appears to be a small group, 4 or 5 individuals. Armed but moving away from our team's route." Sarah nodded. "Keep monitoring, alert me if they change direction." Captain Reynolds joined her, studying the feed. "Local hunters." "Possibly," Sarah said, "or a forward scout group. Either way, they're not intercepting our current path." Hours passed as the extraction team moved deeper into hostile territory. Each checkpoint clearance brought a momentary relief that was quickly replaced by tension for the next phase. Sarah remained steady, her experience allowing her to maintain calm even as stress levels around her rose. "Sandstorm team has reached the target location," the radio crackled, "proceeding with extraction of the asset." This was the most vulnerable point of the operation, when the team would be stationary, focused on securing their intelligence asset. Sarah had insisted on additional drone surveillance during this phase, a precaution that Captain Reynolds had readily supported. "Movement detected," Gomez reported suddenly. "Large group, heavily armed, moving toward the original extraction route." Sarah and Reynolds exchanged glances. Had they stuck with the original plan, their team would have been walking directly into this force. Relay to Sandstorm Team, Reynolds ordered. Expedite extraction and proceed to Checkpoint Delta immediately. For 20 tense minutes, they watched as the extraction team secured the asset and began their withdrawal. The hostile force remained focused on the original route, apparently anticipating an approach that would never come. Sandstorm Team clear of the hot zone, came the welcome report. Asset secure, proceeding to extraction point. The command center erupted in muted cheers and sighs of relief. Captain Reynolds turned to Sarah, extending his hand. Well done, Major. She shook it firmly. It's not over until they're home, Captain. He nodded, understanding. 3 hours to exfil, let's bring them home. As the operation entered its final phase, Colonel Harrington joined them in the command center. Excellent work, both of you, he said quietly. This operation couldn't have succeeded without your combined expertise. The extraction proceeded smoothly until the team was just 30 minutes from the rendezvous point. That's when everything changed. Contact, came the urgent radio call, taking fire from the North Ridge. Sarah rushed to the tactical display. Somehow, a small enemy group had positioned themselves along the extraction route, not the large force they'd been tracking, but a separate unit that had escaped their surveillance. Sandstorm Team, find cover, Reynolds commanded. Air support is en route, ETA 12 minutes. Too long, Sarah murmured, studying the terrain. She grabbed the radio. Sandstorm Team, this is Major Mitchell. There's a dry riverbed 200 meters southeast of your position. It provides cover and a direct route to the extraction point. Copy that, Major, came the response through bursts of gunfire. Moving to the riverbed. The next 10 minutes were excruciating as they watched the team fight their way to the alternate route while taking fire. 2 soldiers were injured, though not critically. When they finally reached the riverbed, the team was able to move more quickly towards safety. Air support arrived, driving back the enemy fighters. 18 minutes later, the extraction helicopter lifted off with the team and their valuable intelligence asset on board. The command center erupted in cheers. Colonel Harrington clapped both Sarah and Reynolds on the shoulders. Outstanding work, both of you. As the adrenaline of the operation subsided, Sarah stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and orange. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility ease slightly now that the team was safely on their way home. Captain Reynolds joined her, offering a bottle of water. Thought you might need this. Thank you, she said, accepting it gratefully. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Reynolds spoke. That riverbed wasn't on any of our tactical maps. No, Sarah agreed. It was on an old survey map I studied last night. I memorized the terrain features just in case. Reynolds shook his head, impressed. That kind of preparation saved lives today. That's the job, Sarah said simply. I owe you an apology, Reynolds said, turning to face her. Not just for the coffee and how I treated you before, but for doubting your judgment about the extraction route. Sarah met his gaze. Healthy skepticism is part of good planning, Captain. You were doing your job. Maybe, but I let assumptions cloud my judgment. He paused. When I first saw you in your proper uniform, I was embarrassed, then defensive. It took seeing your expertise in action to really understand what we almost lost by not having your input from the beginning. We got there in the end, Sarah said. That's what matters. The debriefing session later that evening was thorough but positive. The mission had succeeded, the intelligence asset was secure, and the injured team members were stable and recovering well. Colonel Harrington made a point of recognizing both Sarah's intelligence work and Reynolds' tactical leadership as key factors in the operation's success. As the debriefing concluded, Colonel Harrington had one final announcement. Before we wrap up, I want to let you all know that Major Mitchell will be joining us permanently as our new Intelligence Division Chief. Sarah looked up in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of it. Her experience and expertise are exactly what this command needs, Harrington continued. I've already received approval from higher up. That is, if you're willing to accept the position, Major. All eyes turned to Sarah. She thought about the past few weeks, from serving coffee to saving lives. She thought about the team she'd come to respect despite the rocky start. I'd be honored, sir, she said. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the Intelligence Division to find the team already hard at work. Lieutenant Gomez greeted her with a crisp salute and a warm smile. "Welcome to your new command, ma'am." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sarah replied, returning the salute. As she moved through the office, she noticed a new coffee machine on the counter in the corner. Beside it was a handwritten note. "For the division chief who knows how important good intelligence is and how to make a decent cup of coffee. Captain Reynolds." Sarah smiled, shaking her head at the gesture. She poured herself a cup and took a satisfying sip before setting it down on her new desk. There was work to be done, missions to plan, and lives that would depend on getting things right. 6 months ago, she had nearly given up after a mission gone wrong. Now she had found her place again, not despite the challenges and misconceptions she'd faced, but perhaps because of them. The experience of being underestimated had reminded her of something important. True leadership wasn't about rank or recognition. It was about doing what needed to be done, regardless of who got the credit. Major Sarah Mitchell picked up the first intelligence report of the day and began to read, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, serving coffee or saving lives, whatever the mission required.